Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to another exciting episode of Trigger Warning Radio. I am your host, the Kaiju Conservative. And folks, I think at this point we can agree that the United Kingdom is swiftly approaching the status of fascist hellhole. There's a couple of incidents that happened over the weekend that highlight the absolute contempt and hostility that British officials have towards free speech and anybody who thinks differently than what the government would like. So, first such incident that we had Austrian activist Martin Sellner and American author Brittany Pettibone. They were barred from entering England at Heathrow Airport. They were actually held for 3 days by British immigration officials before being deported. So why were they deported, you may ask? Well, it's because they were going to interview Tommy Robinson. Tommy Robinson, of course, you might be familiar with. He is a I don't want to call him a conservative necessarily, because that word kind of has a different connotation over in Europe than it does in America. But he is on the right. He's a right-wing leader, and he's somebody who has been bashed by the government as promoting hate speech and racism. They were planning on Sellner and Pettibone were planning on interviewing him while they were in England. So because of that, they were picked up at Heathrow Airport as they tried to enter the country, and they were held for 3 days, and then they were deported. And now they've been banned from England as a result. Then you had Canadian right-wing activist Lauren Southern. She attempted to enter Britain through Calais. She was actually stopped at Calais by immigration officials, and she was barred from the United Kingdom because she is supposedly a racist. In fact, she tweeted that the British officials investigated her under Schedule 7 Terrorism Act because of alleged racism. At least they let me identify as Pakistani on my report. LOL. Still being held by police. Okay. So you've got all these right-wing people being banned from Britain. You've got hate speech laws over there which have just absolutely run amok, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, you go over to Britain, you can commit violent crimes, you can commit terrorism, you can attack people with knives and acid. In fact, London is now one of the acid attack capitals of the world. You can do all of that. But God forbid you say anything bad about Muslims or minorities or anybody who identifies under the LGBTQ, G, Z, X, Y, pi, whatever the hell it is banner. God forbid you tell it like it is. If you see Muslim terrorism and you call it out for what it is, you will be put in jail over there so fast it'll make your head spin. You can do any violent acts you want. You can even spend 40 years grooming white girls for rape gangs. And as long as you are a brown person, as long as you are a minority, you will get a pass. But the second you speak out against any of that, you are an enemy of the state and you are jailed and in prison. Folks, Britain has now officially become a meme, if it wasn't already before. And folks, this is part and parcel for the left. These draconian hate speech laws, this is how the left stifles criticism of its agenda. Look at Germany. Germany is the exact same way. Germany has very, very draconian hate speech laws. Maybe not as bad as Britain, but getting there. If you criticize Muslim migrants for ruining your country, you are going to be thrown in jail and fined, or both. And another illustration, folks, we had Sadiq Khan, the mayor of London. Mr. Terrorism is part and parcel of living in the big city himself. He gave a talk to the BBC ahead of the South by Southwest technology conference in Austin, in which he said that companies like Facebook and Twitter have to do more on the issue of hate speech, and that the government must cajole them to take action. He specifically said, we have evolving economies, which means we should have evolving regulations. For too long, politicians and policymakers have allowed this revolution to take place around us, and we've had our head in the sand. And then he went on to reference Germany, like I gave that example before. He said Germany is an example of where the German government said enough. Unless you take down hate messages, unless you take down fake news, we will fine you. So right there, you have the mayor of London, calling for companies to censor quote unquote hate speech. If not, they will face the consequences levied against them by the government. And folks, we look at Britain and we look at Europe and we think to ourselves, that sort of thing can't happen over here, because we've got freedom of speech enshrined in the First Amendment of our Constitution. Except that kind of thing is happening here, and it's been happening. It's been happening for a while, actually. I mean, all you have to do is look at the university system. Look at the colleges and universities across the country. You have colleges and universities where free speech has been relegated to specific places on campus at specific times of the day with approval by the administration. And if your free speech is not approved by the administration, you cannot do that. You can be fined or face disciplinary charges at some of these universities if you exercise your right to free speech outside of appropriate times, outside of appropriate places. And that's not how free speech works, but that's how the left is treating free speech. Because again, they don't want it. Free speech allows people to question the leftist narrative. It allows them to question the leftist agenda. And the leftist agenda, ladies and gentlemen, it is not something that holds up to scrutiny at all. Scrutiny of any kind, sunlight of any kind, is completely anathema to the left. If you start questioning, the fact that, the quote unquote fact that you can choose your gender and that in fact there are over 50 genders, if you start questioning that fact, this whole thing falls apart for the left. If you start questioning the fact that most terror attacks are committed by Muslims, that's bad for the left. If you start questioning the fact that a good portion of illegal immigrants are criminals, that's bad for the left. You're not allowed to question their agenda, because if you question their agenda, you question their power, and that is what leads to their agenda being defeated. That is what leads to their power being lessened. And this is something that has been spreading. Ladies and gentlemen, we see this with social media companies. We see this with Facebook and Twitter. More Twitter than Facebook, but Facebook is definitely almost as guilty as Twitter. We see these social media companies shadow banning or outright banning conservative accounts. YouTube demonetizing conservative accounts or anybody who isn't sufficiently left wing. And again, that's just one more way to silence free speech. If the left could get away with passing draconian speech laws and hate speech laws here, if they could bring those European laws over here to America, they would. And in fact, they have been trying to do so for decades, ladies and gentlemen. And what we need to do as a nation, as a country, is we need to speak out against that. We need to point this out. We need to remind people, not just people on the left, but we need to remind people who aren't political that free speech is not conditional. Free speech is not something that is granted to you by the government. It is not something that is granted to you by any institution. It is something that you have as a right, as a basic human right. It is your basic human right to think for yourself and to question what you are being told, regardless of who's telling you that. If somebody on the right is telling you something, feel free to question that. If somebody on the left is telling you something, feel free to question that as well. You shouldn't have to worry about being labeled a racist, or a sexist, or a bigot, or a homophobe, or you shouldn't have to worry about being thrown in jail for exercising your right of free speech. And that is what we have to keep reminding people of, ladies and gentlemen, because if we do not do that, if we don't take to these platforms like Twitter and Facebook and YouTube and the alternative platforms like Gab and BitChute and PewTube and DTube and all of those things, if we do not take to these platforms and remind people that the right to free speech exists, it will die a very slow but noticeable death. Eventually we will get to the point where we are not allowed to say anything that goes against the leftist narrative for fear of government reprisals. We cannot let that happen, ladies and gentlemen. We have to question everything that the left is telling us. We have to question everything that everybody tells us, and we have to remind people that that is their God-given right. It is the only way that we can keep our right to free speech in this country. Hey guys, thanks so much for listening. If you liked what you heard, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel. Both of those things help me out quite a bit. We are at over 300 subscribers right now, ladies and gentlemen. I think we can push that up even further. Once again, thanks so much for listening, and I will see you all next time.